Hey, hello, and welcome or welcome back, I suppose. Just chatting today, no voiceover, like I said on Tuesday, for any books that cover topics that are sort of realistically dark, like with this being crime fiction, or with The Virgin Suicides the other day. I just think it's better if I sit and do a regular book review rather than sitting down, doing a voiceover while you watch me paint my face. It feels a bit whimsical to be talking about that while doing that. I mean, yes, I've still got my face painted, but to me there's a difference. Today, as I'm sure you've seen in the title, we will be looking at The Devil's Advocate by Steve Cavanagh. This is book 5 in the 6th-ish of the best, and because it's 6th-ish, the final 2 will be coming next week. So let's get on with it, shall we? This book has that very clear American crime fiction style. It's something that I spotted when I was reading The Broken Window by Jeffrey Deaver, the difference being that I like this book. But this type of fiction has a very particular, not type of fiction, but like I said, American crime fiction has this very particular voice to it that, without actually looking into what makes it what it is, I can't say that off the top of my head, but it is something that becomes very noticeable once you've read a couple of books. You probably don't have to read that much to just pick up on that very particular style. So the antagonist in this book is a man called Randall Korn. He's a district attorney in Alabama, and he sent more people to death row than anybody else in the US, by a mile as well. It's not just one of those where, well, someone has to have the most people sent there. It's like most people are here and he's here for sending people to death row, and basically it's starting to look suspicious as to why he needs to get rid of so many people. And there's this description of him right in the first chapter where he's got this description of like a bureaucratic killer, and it's a really cold and biting description, and I just love it. It sets the tone for the book and for his character really well. One thing I'm always grateful for in crime fiction is that it remains as tasteful as it can for the genre. I'm aware that there is often going to be some level of violence, but I don't like overly descriptive details about gore and the violent acts themselves. If you've ever watched The Casual Criminalist, which is a true crime, both a podcast and they make videos here on YouTube, the host there, Simon Whistler, often sort of says the way he likes to talk about true crime is less Saw and more CSI. And when I'm both interested in hearing about true crime and reading crime fiction, I think I'm in line with that as well. I don't want excessive blood and gore and awful details. I like relative tact. And Cavanagh doesn't go overboard at any point. He remains tactful, and there are still descriptions of what happened. You're gonna have that, but with things like the police reports and the coroner's reports, that's where you get most of the gorier, for want of a better phrase, details, and therefore it doesn't feel excessive because it has that cold clinical feel to it. And in terms of any acts of violence enacted, a lot more is left to the imagination than is actually spelled out to you. So while I said that Randall Korn is the main antagonist, there's sort of two groups here. One is Randall Korn and the other corrupted officials that he's brought into his network, and the other group, which I wasn't expecting, is a white supremacist group based on a real 19th century group that was anti-freeing the slaves, I think, was their biggest movement. And like I said, I wasn't expecting to make it. And like I said, I wasn't expecting it to make a look in. That wasn't where I was expecting this book to go. I mean, you don't need me to tell you that, like, vocal racism is an issue in the Deep South, right? But I really like the way that Steve Cavanagh talks about it. In particular, not just the links to the South, but the way that, I think in particular, the way that people are lured into hate groups, because they often employ cult-like tactics for reaching out to the most vulnerable people in society, and they become the ones that are in the foreground for these groups. They're the ones that commit the most violent acts, as seen in this book. And he explores that really well, from the reluctant early stages of not really being sure about it to very slowly being introduced a bit more to a bit more to a bit more until you're fully indoctrinated. And the shot might look different because we just had a fall, but I think we'll actually be fine. Where was I? Yeah, so what I was about to say was, I know it's apparently not actually true, the whole frog in hot water thing, but it is still a good metaphor to use. Of if you had immediately gone to, I won't spoil who it is because I think it's something that is more interesting to actually read, but they don't throw this character in at the deep end being like, we want you to commit violent acts of terrorism. What they do is they lure him in like he's about to become part of a support network, and then slowly build him up to the point where he is willing to commit incredibly violent acts of terrorism. And like I was saying with the frog in hot water, if they'd have thrown him in being like, commit violent acts of terrorism, he would have been like, fuck off, no. But because they put him in the cold water and slowly warmed him up, he didn't notice that it had started boiling and he was in too deep. Also, I'm really glad that both in the book and in the author's notes at the end, it is recognised that the actual biggest terrorist threat in the US, at least, is white nationalists, not people externally. So usually it is people like ISIS that are put as these are the worst terrorists that we're dealing with, and obviously there are still problems there, but nowhere near in the way that the white nationalists are causing a problem. Domestic terror is way, way worse of a problem, especially in the US. I don't know what that's like in the UK, but yeah, in the US, white nationalist terrorism, like most mass shootings in the US, are by white people, and usually white men of a certain age who have been radicalized by these groups in some way. So one of the group of lawyers / investigators, Harry, he's an older guy and he's got a really deep voice, and at one point his voice is, now I'm going to look at my script, but his voice is described as like honey rolling round in a barrel, and I know that's one of those that could go either way for me of whether I would like it or not, but I think in context for this book I really like it because it sounds like one of those phrases from the Deep South that just have a really nice ring to them. If you spend any time listening to Jim Ross on commentary, because it's me and I'm gonna bring wrestling into it, I can't help myself. It sounded like one of those things that he just like rolls off constantly, and I always like the way they sound. They always have a really nice cadence to them. I know this is going to sound obvious given that this is crime fiction, but this is the type of book where throughout the early stages of the book, through to about, I would say, halfway to 2/3, you're seeing all these threads being laid out, tugged out, maybe slightly threaded together, but you're just waiting for the point where they need to be tied. And you're always given just a bit more info than the investigators, and I like that. I like fiction. I like crime fiction with a little bit of dramatic irony where you get just more, but I also like being with the investigators for the most part. I like that, again, balance. It's about striking balance, and it works really well. I was at the beginning of court proceedings where I was like, okay, you've got a lot laid out. Can things start being tied up now? And almost like bloody magic, that is when things start getting tidied up. I mean, rhythm and pacing is something that is very apparent in this book. It's everything happens at just the right moment. And speaking of rhythm, there's a scene where one of the investigators, Block, is getting some paperwork about somebody who's died and his wife, basically to help the investigation. And the rhythm to that scene is so nice. It feels like something that would be really nicely directed by Edgar Wright. It's got this kind of choppy rhythm to it with really nice comedic timing and really well used repetition. I really like the way it worked. It really felt like an Edgar Wright scene in my head, and I just love that. Now, one thing that I was really looking forward to in this book, because the investigators are all lawyers, is that there was going to definitely be courtroom scenes. I love crime fiction with courtroom scenes because you get all those little gotcha moments. Think The Perm and Legally Blonde. Those moments, I love them. Am I aware that most actual court proceedings are dull as dishwater? Absolutely. Will that stop me loving the drama? Absolutely not. I love it so much. And there's a few of these little gotcha moments, and they're played at the right time, and sometimes you think they're gonna happen and they're blocked, and it's just things fitting together and being pulled away. And the courtroom scenes are really the highlight of this book for me. So the antagonist that I mentioned earlier on, the district attorney Corn, there's this running motif with him where when he walks into a room and somebody's near to him, they just have this foul stench of death when they're around him. Now, the truth is that he has a wound on his leg which is rotting, so it obviously that's got that foul stench to it, but I just love him being this literal portent of death whenever he walks into a room. It's something that could be cheesy, but I think it's handled really well. Now, I think I have to end my review by talking about my biggest criticism of the book, because my biggest criticism is actually how the book ends. So, the book this isn't spoilers, the book kind of concludes with, we're fighting corruption. How? Well, we're going to be corrupt too. It just felt a little bit, left a bad taste in my mouth, honestly. Now, that didn't prevent me from enjoying the book. I thought this was a thoroughly entertaining book, but it's just a shame that that's the note that it ends on. It's also made sure that I really am looking forward to 13, which is on the shelf behind me. Eventually, I will get around to that. That will either be towards the end of this year or at some point next year, because I do have things relatively planned out. More of that. Towards the end of October, you will see the plans for the end of the year, so look forward to that. If you are looking for some great crime fiction with a biting political edge, then this might well be just the book for you. Now, as you may know, I am trying to get a little subscriber boost by the end of the year. I'm trying to hit that 50 mark. I know it's not a lot, but it would make me feel like a little happy guy. So anything you can do to help will be much appreciated. Liking and commenting, all that good stuff. My Twitter will be in the description. Retweeting the video tweet would help, or just sharing it onto your own. Anything is a great help. So I hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful night, a wonderful whenever you are watching this. Take care of yourselves. Right.